that's where I'm going to close the book on that, and we'll scuttle over to our last point here. Legends of Runeterra, which is Riot's card game, formally announced it is releasing on April 30th, but not just on PC where the beta was, also on mobile. So I'll throw it out there. I was the one who did propose this topic because I am nerding out for sure. I have a history of playing some collegiate Hearthstone. Through their series, I've been following card games all my life, and when you have Riot developing a card game, I mean, it's the same reaction to Valorant. You know, Riot's making an FPS, a tactical FPS. Now they're making a
Hearthstone
card game.
killer.
Oh, please. That's on my list of things to touch. And you know what? I'll start there. It's not going to be that way. I'm telling you right now, because Legends of Runeterra is coming in at a very tumultuous time for digital card games. So Hearthstone, if you have been following the news, released a new expansion, which has pushed it into the Year of the Phoenix, which is like one of its competitive seasons or one of its seasons. It has released its first new class for the first time since its inception, which are overall huge changes for people playing the game, and they've really focused on player-first models and experiences. Magic Arena has been absurdly popular, but I mean that's the go-to game if you're a Magic player, like the physical card game player, and it's a very exciting time for digital card game players. Will Legends of Runeterra be able to stick in that place? Marshall, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll be honest. When they announced that Runeterra released, I looked at my game and I went, "Oh yeah, this was beta." And I don't know how. When I look at how people talk about Runeterra, they talk about it in terms of wanting to get lore out of that game to apply to Riot's League of Legends ecosystem. So when I look at Runeterra, I look at it as a necessary slot for Riot as they move towards being like the Blizzard of old. But what I don't see Runeterra is a game that kills anything.
And I think it's kind of interesting to look at the dynamic Runeterra has in that regard to what Hearthstone has. Hearthstone had the exact opposite of that scenario. Warcraft had been a thing for you got to get decades before Hearthstone came out. It had a lot of lore that is very established. There are cinematics that explore that lore. There are books that explore that lore. And I think League of Legends has not nearly made as accessible, glamorous access points for people to make their way into those stories. And
Well,
I think
not yet.
not yet. And I think that's why people are, like you said, looking to the card game when Hearthstone had the opposite problem. They had a world to build on, and the cards can just reflect that world. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how those two games compare in that regard. They almost have complete opposite expectations.
And when we're looking at let's say pros and cons of their entryway into this genre of gaming, I will say Hearthstone has historically probably been on top in terms of digital exclusive card games. Hearthstone did mobile extremely well, where a huge chunk of their players are mobile, including myself at times. They've made it very friendly, accessible. Magic Arena has proven that physical card games can move online. I believe Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. I don't follow it very closely, but I know it's made the switch and it's sufficed for some people.
Still gets good viewership.
Yeah, and when you're looking at online exclusive games, the last big game that tried to make a splash in the scene was Artifact. And have you heard of Artifact since?
I've never heard of Artifact.
Exactly. It was Valve's killer for Hearthstone as a card game, right?
And see, that's like, if we can go right back to CS:GO really quickly, I think that one thing that Valorant might actually have over CS:GO is the fact that it's part of this ecosystem, and Runeterra contributes to this ecosystem, right? Whereas if people want to find lore and whatnot, that drives people to this place. So
go ahead, Ian.
Oh, I if you have more to add to that point, I think I was kind of about to branch off in a different direction, so I'm more than happy to let you say what you were going to say.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up some stuff and give you lots of stuff to play with.
Okay.
I will say, again, Hearthstone's the big dog, but their competitive scene is really lacking right now, so viewership has declined, both at the competitive and collegiate scene, in my opinion, and from what I've seen personally and anecdotally.
No, that's true. I've looked at the stats.
And then
Since YouTube Switch.
And when you look at kind of the pros, I'll say that Riot has done storytelling incredibly well. And if Runeterra is going to be strongly rooted in that storytelling, I think that there's an advantage there. And I think that there's a market for people that might be interested in Runeterra, but when you're making any card game, it's just a very saturated market. So you really have to land all of your shots to make it there.
Yeah. The one thing I want to say, big props to Runeterra on. If you look at the things they are changing as they are approaching the April 30th release,
Yes.
It looks like they are heavily focusing on making it easier to get a deck that's playable and fun to play. That is a big problem. Barrier to entry with Hearthstone is you come in, everyone has these decks that are absolutely swamping you, and you do not have the cards to put together anything competent yet. And sure, you can make budget decks, but I think that's a bit hard that's not something that casual players are thinking about. They come in, they see the same 3 decks absolutely murdering them, and they say, hey, I want one of those 3 decks. Then they find out what that would take, and that's discouraging. But the one thing that is a big worry to me with Legends of Runeterra is the Legends system as a whole. I think the cool part, it's kind of the Achilles heel, but also like the cool part of Hearthstone. It has its pros and cons. Is that decks? People end up finding these gimmicks that define decks, and it's not like even the game wanted those gimmicks to be there necessarily. I mean, it's just the competitive scene theory crafts and makes these awesome combinations happen. Legends of Runeterra seems to spell out what that Legends gimmick is, and then you're just kind of picking the cards that can make that gimmick happen the best. And I think that's going to take out some of the enjoyment from people who have really enjoyed Hearthstone throughout the years.
And I'll say that they are doing what they can to attract those, I won't say washed up card game players, but people who don't know what game they want to pick out, right? So by making it easy to grab a more competitive deck, I think that's a massive thing that card players, even physical or online, have dealt with all of their experiences, right? I mean, no matter what card game you play, it's difficult to have a competitive deck right off the bat. But other small things, I mean, I'm going to say I played the beta quite a bit. The storytelling and the art direction is absolutely incredible, whether it be
Phenomenal.
the cinematics. The cinematics on YouTube that drive story, the cards themselves look so crisp, and you can right click to see the full art. It does so much right aesthetically that I think it's going to be a joy to play if you're a card game veteran. But again, if we're looking at competitive or like entry level person maybe watching a YouTube video, it's going to be really tough to follow along because it doesn't show lots like on the screen visibly when cards are played on the field unless you hover over them. And for spectators, that's going to be really tough to follow along.
Yeah.
I think the YouTube scene will be huge for this game. I mean, Hearthstone. I remember when Hearthstone was in its prime, my YouTube feed was flooded with like Disguised Toast, all of those guys. Like, it was such a big part of what contributed to that game. And I mean, Riot has the fan base to make sure there is a big YouTube community around it. I think that'll be big for the game.
One thing I want to bring up really quickly is when we look at what Riot's MO is when they attack a new genre, is it solve problems, right? So, Nick, you and I both played Hearthstone. One of the biggest issues is you, like, a card had an effect, and you had to remember what that effect was. And you're like, shoot, like, is this going to do what I think it does? With Runeterra, it literally shows you. You right-click it, it shows what card it's going to give you, it shows you what effect is. You can go to that little eye on the left side, and it will show you the total outcome of the rest of the round. Like, there's just so many things that they do. And, we talked about competitive decks, right? Like, I use the standard 4 decks that they give you because I don't know how to build my own deck. And I beat people who build their own decks, right? And
that's big.
Yeah, and it feels really good, too, because I'm like, you think you're good at this game, but you're not. So they solved a lot of the problems that people that played Hearthstone that they had. Now, the one thing that they don't have is those fun combos that you were talking about. But what I will say to that is we're in Runeterra Series 1, right?
Yeah.
If we're releasing cards in like series, we're Series 1. Hearthstone is like Series 83, right? So you can't have those cool combos because we don't have the sample size.
And and so I'll take it because I want to try and wrap things up here. I'll touch on a few points. I'll give each of you guys, let's say, 30 seconds to predict the future. So what do you think the next couple months are going to look like for Runeterra as it comes out? And a couple points to throw onto the mix. Runeterra adds more complexity, so they have the if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, the instance versus sorcery, so fast spells versus slow spells, so you can react.
They have 3 speeds. They have 1 more degree than Magic does.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
That was hard to learn for me.
Yeah, that's weird. I think that's kind of Yu-Gi-Oh derived. I never played Yu-Gi-Oh, but I know Yu-Gi-Oh has a few different speeds as well. So, but yeah, that's you're right. Yeah.
So Riot is giving players more to play with in terms of a macro level or more technical things that they can do. And then on the flip side, though, the beta's been out for quite a while. You talked about kind of the Hearthstone YouTube feed hype. And I saw a lot of that when the beta first released, but since it's really died down. What's the next couple months look like for you, Marshall? And let's get you in there next.
For Runeterra,
yeah,
no different. I'll be honest. I think that Runeterra is one of those games that found like a little niche of people that it solved a problem for, and I don't think it's going to change much. I think that you have too established of a scene with Magic and Hearthstone, and Runeterra doesn't offer enough that's different and fun and engaging that will take a chunk out of those markets.
Ian, what about you?
One thing I could see being interesting is most of the Magic community exists in the real world at at card game shops, at Friday night Magic events, so forth. This coming out on April 30th during shutdown. I mean, I could see. I mean, maybe it grabs some Magic fans that have been craving to play a card game and they haven't been able to go down to the card shop with their friends. Obviously, they have Arena, which has been a big deal for Magic. It finally makes that game playable in an online sense. But it's really going to depend on how much of an audience they can pull, and it's going to be weird to see how much of a fire this spark can ignite.
The biggest thing that Runeterra has going for them is you don't really have to pay for cards. That's the biggest thing.
I think it's gonna allow you to play a lot of different champions. I think it's more, they want us to have 10, 15, 20 decks, kind of like how you play different champs in League. I think they want you to be playing a lot of things, not just one deck you stomp with.
And I think if I were to summarize my experience and kind of my prediction, I would say is, as someone who's played tons of Hearthstone, I've played Magic, I've played Yu-Gi-Oh, I've even played a little bit of Pokemon, and I've dabbled with the different card games. Legends of Runeterra feels exciting, but I can see it being intimidating to someone entry level or someone spectating. So I think that amongst certain communities, so amongst the card game community, there could be a lot of hype for it. There could be some initial gameplay. I think it will float. I don't think it's going to sink like Artifact. I think it will have its own community. I think Gwent is one of those games that has a very die-hard but small community. I think that it will stay afloat. I do not think it will become like the premier card game. I think Magic, Hearthstone still might hold that throne for at least a little while longer. I do think the hype has died down. But for people who do give it a chance and will spectate, they will be graciously rewarded.